Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of This Day in Hockey. Got a special one today. Kind of similar, I guess, to what we did for Rocket Richard last week. That was on the anniversary of his passing. Today's a little bit of a happier anniversary because it's the anniversary of the birth of my dear friend, Larry Clark Robinson. Yes, sir, Larry Robinson. Born on this day, June 2nd, 1951, in the Winchester Hospital. I grew up in the farming hamlet of Marvelville, Ontario, not too far from where I sit here in the village of Osgood, and certainly not too far from the arena that now bears his name in Metcalfe, the Larry Robinson Arena. I don't know if Larry learned how to skate there, but he definitely would have played some of his earliest hockey there, including the year of Junior B, before he went on to Brockville, before he went on to Kitchener, before he was drafted by the Montreal Canadiens, and before he won a Calder Cup with the Nova Scotia Voyageurs. And then the rest is pretty much history, at least in terms of his pro career. But here today, of course, to celebrate with you all and wish my dear friend a happy birthday and try and regale you with a couple of anecdotes and statistics, maybe a story or two here in the next few minutes. I mean, most of my relationship with Larry, I've put out there publicly at one point or another because most of it has been in the public eye at functions and gigs and things of that nature. I've always told the story that the summer he was drafted by Montreal in 1971, 20th overall in what was then the second round, he was playing fastball in the summer for arguably one of the top teams in Canada. Turpin Pontiac were their name. Turpin Pontiac, and they came to Cars, Ontario, the little village just down the road from where I was living, where we had moved only a few short years before from my mom's village, just north of where my mom grew up, north of Quebec City, Stoneham. And the word was that Turpin was coming to town to play our local intermediate heroes there, the Cars Aces. We had the Cars Aces in the summer, the version that wore the ball gloves, and we had the version in the winter that wore the skates. And these are all just local men mostly, who all worked for a living, and they're just very gifted amateur athletes, every single one of them. And I count many of them friends today, and proud to do so. That was an incredible moment to see Larry for the first time as a 12-year-old boy. He was the biggest man I'd ever seen at that point. I'd never seen anybody that big, and you're starstruck. You know, you really are. And of course, he was finishing up his junior career in Kitchener, and you know, years later, you find out that he had played a year at Junior B in Metcalfe, and that he had gone to Brockville and had that legendary fight with John Coburn. And John Coburn is a dear friend of mine now too, and I see him quite regularly. He's a member at Riverview Golf Club where I am, and just a fantastic man. And I'll tell you what, the first time I ever asked Larry about that, wondering if he would remember that altercation, he remembered it vividly and instantaneously. And I guess it must have really been something. I think if memory serves me correctly, they fought from the goal line pretty much all the way out to center ice. I think John was with Hull at the time, I believe. And Larry, of course, with Brockville, 69-70, I want to say. So the guy certainly was used to taking matters into his own hands even back then. Wasn't, you know, he needed a little bit of guidance later on in pro from people like Al McNeil, the coach in Nova Scotia, and Noel Price. I love that Larry has always been so giving back of kindness and compliments towards Noel Price, especially in his book, as a mentor and a man who helped guide him as a pro in Nova Scotia that year. You know something, that year, Nova Scotia is the first Canadian team to win the Calder Cup. And going back to the 1930s, of course, not that there were Canadian teams in every decade going back, but that's still a significant accomplishment by a Canadian point of view. And of course, representing the true north here today with my shirt. So there you go. But Larry's career started with a bang, obviously, in the NHL. Called up about halfway through the next season with the Montreal Canadiens, and a few weeks or so into that call up, he scored his first ever goal against the Los Angeles Kings in LA on a Friday night. Actually very similar to Guy Lafleur, if you back it up about a year and a half. Guy scored his first NHL goal, I believe, on a Friday night in LA. In Larry's case, Montreal won that game 7-1, and the goalie was Rogie Vachon. And in a nice piece of serendipity, certainly at the time, Guy Lapointe drew the first assist on Larry's first ever NHL goal. Would have been something if Serge Savard had got the second assist. You're going, oh, no way, it was three defensemen. But hey, Scotty Bowman used to play Serge Savard up front on the power play just a few short years later. So at any rate, Frank Mahovlich drew the second assist, and Larry's career, such as it was offensively, was off and running. He gets sometimes forgotten how consistent he was offensively in the NHL. Yeah, he only had a couple of seasons with 80-plus points, but he never scored 20 goals, but he was very consistent. And when he retired, 20 years after he started, by the way, never missed the playoffs. Never missed the playoffs in his NHL career. Outstanding. It's only him and Nick Lidstrom can make that statement. 20 years, never missed. Just an incredible accomplishment. But, at the end of the day, when Larry retired in 1992, he was at or near the top of many of the offensive categories in for defensemen at that time. Yeah, you get passed later on by your Borks and Coffees and others, but he's still up there. And over 200 goals, 208 goals, I believe. So he definitely, and he scored some big ones, man. I mean, not only everybody's going to remember their first goal, but that goal he scored in overtime. He only got one goal in the 73 playoffs. And Montreal went on to win the Stanley Cup. It was Larry's first of 6 as a player. But it was overtime, game 2 against Philadelphia after the Habs had lost game 1. It's amazing when you think about it historically how often that had happened. You look at the 79 finals against the Rangers, lose game 1, down 2-0 game 2. You look at the 93 finals against LA, lose game 1. Losing in game 2. I mean, needing a power play goal, and Patrick Roy out to tie it. Eric Desjardins, still the only defenseman to record a hat trick in the finals. That's against LA. You look at 1966 against Detroit. The Habs lost the first 2 games of the finals in Montreal before winning the next 4. So huge goal by Larry in 73 to help Montreal tie that series, and then they were on their way. And and it should be pointed out that 73 team that went on to win the Stanley Cup set an NHL record that'll never, ever be duplicated, and Larry's a part of it. They are the only NHL team with 11 Hall of Fame players on the roster, on that Cup-winning roster. It'll never be duplicated. A lot of people forget Jacques Laperriere was there. Some people forget Henri Richard hadn't retired yet. He was still there. He was a captain, of course. And most people get most of the others, including the big 3. And 11 in total. It's a staggering number. And Detroit will come close when Datsyuk goes in, but there's nobody else, and they will fall short. And the 73 Habs will maintain that mark, and obviously no one will ever duplicate it again. So pretty neat accomplishment for Larry right out of the gate in his first season. And if there's so many defining moments of his career, but that fight with Dave Schultz actually came the next season. 73-74. It's another one that gets shuffled around by people's memories because they think it happened in the 76 season when the Habs went on to beat Philly in 4 straight. It did not. It actually happened in February 74. But I call that fight one of the staple fights in NHL history. I mean, you've got your Hal Fontinato, you've got Proby and that last fight with Marty McSorley that went 2 minutes and 12 seconds. You've got you've got a number of others that stand out. And Larry and Dave Schultz, Ted Harris and Orland Kurtenbach, back to back in the playoffs in 66 and 67. These were titanic battles between incredibly tough men. No matter whether they won or lost, they all deserve the respect. And for Larry to beat Schultz like he did in that scenario at the end of the period during that bench clearing brawl after what Schultz did to John Van Boxmeer in the first period was a seismic moment. It was like John Ferguson and Ted Green in Fergie's first game when he fought Ted Green. And that was a seismic moment in Montreal Canadian or NHL history, signifying that somebody else had arrived. Or you look at Ben Wilson and Wendell Clark. There's another one if you want a Toronto one. A lot of people think that was Wendell's first fight. No, man, it came in his 4th month. He'd already had 5-6 fights. It was like his 7th fight, but it was on Hockey Night in Canada. And he went toe-to-toe with Ben Wilson. And that night in 74, February 17th, when Larry, and I say this all the time, man, when you watch him come on the ice and he comes around the corner of the rink and he comes up, he's looking for Schultz, and then he finds him and they hook up. And I've never actually asked him what the dialogue was. I think we can pretty much surmise what it was. And I also say this, if you're quick on the pause button and you can pause it that very second before Larry throws that first right hand, I swear to God, you can see the hint of a little smile come across his face, and then it says boom, boom. And it's not one of those knockdown, drag him out 2-minute brawls, but I mean, Larry dusted him. And I think it wasn't just the fact that he got the better of Schultz and beat him in that fight. It's that once, I think it was D'Amico or whoever it was pushing him back, and Larry's pushing him away, and then he's going to DuPont, and he's going to Selesky, and everybody's going, you're next, and you're next. That set the table for 76. It 100% set the table for 76. Can you imagine the Broad Street Bullies going to their 3rd straight final, 2-time Cup champion, running roughshod over the NHL, and here they are against the Montreal Canadiens in the finals, and there was one fight. One fight in that final, that's it. Moose DuPont and Mario Tremblay was the only 5-minute majors for fighting in that series. Also, of course, Game 2 was when Larry hit Gary Dornhofer. Again, one of the most famous moments in NHL history. That was in Game 2. The Habs were up 2-0. Was in the 3rd period, about 9 minutes to go. Larry came across from the right to the left, caught Dorney right against the boards. And I will say this, always pissed me off a little bit, that I think it was Lou Nanne who was doing the color that particular time. It's always irked me all these years later that, he right away he calls Larry for the elbow, He says, look at the elbow. Then when you see the replay, see Larry's elbow never left his side. Never left his side. In fact, he shouldn't even been a penalty on the play. They called boarding. Shouldn't even have been a penalty. Came over, totally clean hit, especially by 1976 standards. Are you kidding me? But I think they called the penalty because of the ferocity of the hit. If you watch it on YouTube and you see the boards and the glass, and this, of course, leads to the rest of the story. When first it's Bill Barber over there with his stick trying to pry the board out. He can't do it. They have to send the forum staff out to fix the boards while Larry's in the box. It's a great image, actually. He's got the towel around his neck and he's playing, fiddling with his stick. I can see it so clear in my mind. And the Habs killed it. Dave Schultz did score late. Habs hung on to win 2-1, but won the series 4 straight. And there you have it, Larry's 2nd Stanley Cup. And he had really, really arrived at that point, obviously at the Big 3. And then later that year, in September, he plays in the Canada Cup. I mean, look at that defense. You got the Big 3 with Bobby Orr and Denny Potvin. Hello. And Jimmy Watson. Carol Vadnais was like your 7th D. Didn't see any action. Watson played 2 games. They basically went with 5. And Larry being a part of it. And Scotty Bowman says it's the greatest team ever assembled. I'm inclined to agree. I think that's the greatest team ever assembled, and Larry was a part of it. So, again, just another feather in the cap as the Habs were beginning their assault on the NHL, winning 4 consecutive Stanley Cups, including the next season, 77, where they lost only 8 games that entire season out of 80. And it's in that season where I wanted to try and maybe bring a little bit of a different stat or anecdote to the table. That year, Larry was plus 120, as most of you know. Second only to Bobby Orr with plus 124. Larry would go on to, over his career, end up, I believe, plus 730, which is number 1 all-time NHL history. Staggering total. I don't care what you think of the stat. And, a big chunk of it fueled by that season in 77 when he was plus 120. Larry was on the ice for 219 goals that Montreal scored that year. They scored 387. I believe he was on the ice for 219 of them. More importantly, and again, stats, it can become minutia and it can go from the ridiculous to the sublime, especially today, the way the analytics are. Some of them are, can certainly provide some aid to making decisions, I guess, but some of it can be pretty crazy. But I like to look back at that one, and this is one I haven't really offered publicly too many times, but it's come up in conversation. That year, Larry Robinson was only on the ice for 10 power play goals against. I think he played almost the whole season. He might have missed a couple of games. I'd have to go back and double check. I think he might have. I don't know if he played all 80 games. I think he missed a couple games. But he was only on the ice for 10 power play goals against. You go, well, Liam, he's probably out there with Serge Savard. You got Ken Dryden behind. Yeah, valid points for sure. But at the end of the day, he was the guy. He was the guy. And that's a staggering statistic. And if you by way of comparison, if you want to look at Bobby Orr's big season in 1971, one of his big seasons, he was on the ice for 30 power play goals against. Not to compare the 71 Bruins to the 77 Habs. I mean, the 71 Bruins ran into Ken Dryden and got, bounced in the first round in 7 games. But they had set 37 records, team and individual, that season, and scored 399 goals. And next to the Oilers, there's only the Oilers that scored over 400. The Bruins are right there at 71. And Bobby Orr is regarded by most, myself included, as the greatest player ever to wear skates. So I think it's kind of an interesting comparison. Let's put it that way. It's just a stat I like to champion for Larry. Not one that gets spoken of very often. It's from 77. It's way back as his career was now. But I mean, the end of the day, I think it's a telling stat to what he meant on the ice. His presence, the respect level, the level of intimidation that he put out physically, how he was able to back that up. The Schultz fight set the table for that, but it's not like all fights stopped. He still had to get busy from time and again, and he could contribute offensively. I mean, in 78 he wins the Conn Smythe Trophy, and if you think the goal he scored in 73 was huge, which it was against the Flyers, that was just a shot that overwhelmed Doug Favell from long distance. In 78, Game 5, the pivotal Game 5 with the series tied at 2 in the final against the Bruins, the first goal of the game is Larry going coast to coast. I think it's the greatest goal he ever scored, for sure. And when you want to talk about an impact, I mean, the Bruins were proving that they were definitely an unbelievably worthy opponent. And I think that's worth noting as well. And, of course, Larry went on to win, as mentioned, the Conn Smythe Trophy. Couple Norris trophies, 6-time Cup winner, 6-time All-Star, Hockey Hall of Fame. Everything he did as a player. I mean, the Habs go on to win again in 79. They have the Surprise Cup in 86. Larry has another monstrous year offensively. He had donned a helmet at this point. And, I want to tell a story, just a sidebar on that, because I believe he had fallen and hurt his head in a game against the Boston Bruins. And I remember telling him that a conversation I had with Terry O'Reilly, and I'm going to tell you everybody that in a second. But he said, when he hurt his head on the ice and he was in the infirmary being looked at in Boston, Terry actually came in to check on him, check to see if Larry was out. Larry told me that himself, and I thought that was incredibly classy of Terry to do. I'm not surprised at all. He never went after little guys. He fought fair every time, and he busted his ass every shift. I have so much respect for Terry O'Reilly. But after Larry told me that, even more so, really, and I remember sitting right beside Terry O'Reilly in the dressing room here in Ottawa, one of the alumni events back in the day. And Jimmy Kite, another longtime NHL defenseman here from Ottawa, had put out a questionnaire and had handed it to all of the former NHLers that were in the rink doing the different, playing in the different games and things of that nature. I was sitting beside Terry when he filled his out. And one of the questions was, opponent you respected the most. And he put Larry Robinson. He put Larry Robinson down. And I went, wow, that's kind of cool. And then there was another question that said, opponent who hit you the hardest. And he put Larry Robinson. I said, well, I'm not familiar with that. And he says, oh, man. He says, listen, I fought Gillies and and he talked about all the fights. He fought Schultz and he fought everybody, right? And he said he was never hit harder than when Larry caught him one time. And he told me that. And that came from the man's mouth. So I put a lot of stock in that. And I just think it speaks to the measure of respect that Larry had throughout his career. And, that 80s Habs team were, they're pretty solid, man. I mean, Semi's 84, win the Cup 86, Semi's 87. Of course, a big pregame brawl against the Flyers. Flyers won the series, but Larry was involved in that scrap too and did pretty good. And then 88, they lose to the Bruins for the first time in 45 years. And that's when Michael Telvin broke Stéphane Richet's hand. And then in 89, they're right back in the Stanley Cup Finals. And, there's Larry again. I mean, it's pretty impressive stuff. He goes to Los Angeles and plays 3 seasons with the LA Kings. And right out of the gate, almost in one of those first games in October of 89, October 15th, Wayne Gretzky passes Gordie Howe for the most career points in NHL history on October 15, 89, point number 1,851. I've told the story many times. And who's the first guy in to congratulate him? Larry Robinson. Larry was right there. So I thought, man, it's so cool. When you think about who he played with in Montreal and all the Hall of Famers and the great players. And there he is then getting a chance to play with Wayne. And, of course, he'd been in the 76 Canada Cup with Bobby Orr and Bobby Hull and Phil Esposito and Bobby Clark and the French Connection and not and his own teammates, of course, Lanny McDonald and so many others, Marcel Dion, the great Marcel, so many others, and he had a chance to finish his career playing with Wayne. I just think that's pretty impressive. Of course, he did in the Canada Cups as well in 81 and 84, so it wasn't like it was his first occasion to have that opportunity. By the way, Larry went overseas and the International played the World Championships in 81 and won top defenseman over there. So, it's everywhere he went, everywhere he went. And statistically, it wasn't that his numbers overwhelmed you, but it's the whole package. The size, the physicality, the intimidation, the respect, and the offensive capability. You put it all together, and you've got the complete package. Maybe you could make the case overall, the complete package of the greatest defenseman when you put that all in there. If you put in the intimidation part of it, because that was such a huge component in the 1970s. It was such a violent decade, so much fighting, so much brawling, and so few players in the league at that time really wanted any part of him for a period of 5 to 6, 7 years. Nobody really wanted any part of him. So his career as a player is well documented and legendary, and takes a backseat to nobody. If you look at the overtime goal he scored against Toronto to eliminate the Leafs in 79 on a power play with Tiger Williams in the box, who settles Tiger down when he's going absolutely nuts? Was it Bob Myers who made that call? I forget. I think it may have been. But I don't think it was Bruce Hood. But anyway, regardless, Tiger's going nuts. It's not his teammates. It's it's not the officials. It's Larry Robinson settling Tiger Williams down. And what does Tiger do? I mean, he eventually comes off the ledge, Larry probably saved Tiger from God knows how many games of a suspension if he doesn't do what he did there. That's his nature, the way the guy was, and just an incredible player for sure. And then he goes into coaching, and he wins 6 as a player, and he gets his three more Stanley Cups in the coaching realm, with the New Jersey Devils. He's scouting for them. He's assistant coach for them. He takes over. There's only been 2 coaches. There's only been a couple of coaches to win the Stanley Cup in an interim basis. Like some coaches were replaced in mid-season, and the coach that replaced them went on to win the Stanley Cup, like Dick Irvin Sr. back in 32 or Al McNeil in 71, among others. But they immediately became the de facto head coach. In 2000, when Larry took over for Robbie Ftorek, he was an interim head coach. And they went on to win the Stanley Cup. And those stories about Larry in the dressing room after some of their losses and how he comported himself and conducted himself, and the respect now that he had of his players that he was coaching, just took it right up, page right from when he used to play. Same sort of thing. And then he bounces back and forth from New Jersey a couple times. Of course, he's got the stint in Los Angeles. and he has a stint in San Jose, and then lo and behold, he gets his name on another Stanley Cup in St. Louis, his 10th. He's chasing the great Jean Beliveau. Jean's got 17. I mean, Larry's with 10 is pretty impressive, and just a testament to his love of the game and his knowledge of the game and what he's able to. Not everybody who played the game great can necessarily have any type of impact or effect after you retire and you stay involved in the game as a coach, assistant coach, scout, advisor, whatever the capacity may be. And so many people that I've talked to that have worked with him or for him just sing his praises. And it sure is great to hear because, as I said right off the start of this thing, he grew up 25 minutes from here. That's absolutely remarkable to me that things have come that kind of full circle. So I'll finish with this because this is a man who, as I said, I got to know his parents, his brother Mo. I saw his brother Mo yesterday. His brother Mo was one of the top mechanics in the city of Ottawa, working for the legendary Todd Wallace at Wallace Service Center on Highway 31. And I was there yesterday for a couple little things, and I saw Mo, and we had a great chat, and I was telling him about the great picture that Dave Stubbs put on Twitter of Mo and Larry and Brian Robinson, their late brother, who we lost far too soon, number of years back now. And it's such a great picture. It was in 2000, actually, when Larry won that cup with New Jersey, and it was so good to see. But I'll finish with this story and this anecdote. It's my favorite Larry Robinson story, and I was there to witness it. It was during the late 90s when Murray Wilson ran the fantasy camps up in Mont Tremblant. By the way, that very first game that when Larry got his first goal, February 1st, 73, I believe it was, against the Los Angeles Kings. The Habs won the game 7-1. Murray Wilson got 2 goals that night. Murray Wilson and Chuck Leffley each scored 2 goals that night. I think that's pretty cool because Muzz and Larry got drafted the same year. They've known each other forever. And Murray ran that fantasy camp for a few years. And the golf portion of it was at Dickie Moore's golf course, Arundel. And had a great, beautiful lodge area, where you'd hold the dinners and that. It was I remember the old wood porch there. And I actually walked in with Larry this one particular time. Larry was just ahead of me, of course. I was walking behind, and we walk up and sitting on chairs on the porch on this beautiful summer morning in the late 90s in Tremblant are Henri Richard and Phil Goyette and Dollard Saint Laurent, among others. And Larry spots Dolly, and Dollard sees Larry, and he stands up, and Larry goes bouncing up the steps, and he walks over, and they've got these big grins on, and Larry says, "Hey, old 19," and Dolly says, "Hey, young 19," and they embraced. Dollard wore 19 on the Montreal Canadiens, so 2 19s sharing that link, that Montreal Canadian link, one of the strongest bonds in sports history. And they embraced, and I'll never forget it. I don't know who else saw it. I don't know who else paid attention to it. I was mere few feet away. I'll never forget it. The respect that Larry showed Dollard Saint Laurent, but also Dollard was paying to Larry as well. And they had this beautiful, beautiful, warm embrace. And I'll just never forget it. And I think it's one of the, to me, just signifies what being a Montreal Canadian was all about, how many Stanley Cups those two men shared, the link, their historical link together with the crest and the number, and then being there that day. I lost track of how many rings were there that day representing in the crowd. Murray would invite any able-bodied Hab that was in the area that wanted to come, and of course, anybody who did, pretty much everybody had. Chris Nyland was probably the guy with the fewest rings with 1. From 86, everybody else had, you needed to check your 5 or 6 rings at the door. It was unfreaking believable. Jean Beliveau was there. Henri Richard, Yvon Cornouet, 31 rings just with those 3 guys. Then he got Larry 6 as a player and at that time. And it is amazing stuff to watch that embrace. And so I'm going to go out with that and do a toast to my longtime friend, and I've told the story for years too that, I got to know Larry's parents. Larry's dad ran the fair in Metcalfe, helped run it anyway for years, one of the biggest fairs in the Valley or the Rurals. And he used to cash my $20 checks there in the late 70s. So he'd say, "Oh, Liam, you're not spending all that in the beer tent, are you, son?" "No, sir, Mr. Robinson, no, sir." "No, I'm saving some for a hot dog. A man's got to eat." It's unbelievable when I think of the memories. I went to his parents' services and a Daly's funeral home on 31, and I mean it's just, this is our area, man. This is where we're from. It's where he's from. It's where I grew up too, and I'm proud of that. And I'm proud of my connection and my association and my friendship with the family, and especially with Larry today on his birthday. So I will wish you a happy anniversary of your birth, my dear friend. I hope you have the best day you can under the circumstances, and I hope you're safe and well, and the whole family is. And God willing, we'll have a chance to talk again. If not, break bread and have a pint again soon. Here's to you, Larry. All the best, my friend. Happy birthday. G'day.